Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. This is part 2 of the series where I explain the theory of demand in a beginner friendly manner. So, let's get into it. In the previous video, we had seen that demand is the optimal quantity of a good that a consumer chooses at different price levels. We had looked at the law of demand, normal and inferior goods, and what complementary and substitute goods are. Let's start the video by looking at the factors that are responsible for a shift in demand curve versus the factors that cause a movement along the demand curve. But first, what is demand curve? Demand curve is a graphical representation of the law of demand. That is, it shows the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Therefore, it's a downward sloping curve. A change in price of a good results in movement along the demand curve. Thus, one can say movements along the demand curve pertains to changes in quantity demanded of a good. Let P1 be the initial price at which consumer demands Q1 quantity of the good. Now let the price decrease to P2. Let's see what happens. When the price of the good decreases to P2, the quantity demanded of the good increases to Q2. Thus one can see that there is a downward movement along the same demand curve, as indicated by the arrow. Now let's turn to the factors that cause a shift in demand curve. Change in demand due to changes in factors other than price will lead to a shift of the demand curve. This shift can be a rightward shift, indicating that demand for good has increased, or a leftward shift, indicating that demand for good has decreased. The first factor that will result in a shift in demand is a change in the income of the consumer. If the income increases, a consumer can buy more of a good at the same price level. Thus, demand curve shifts rightwards. It is important to remember that when we are talking about a shift or a movement along the demand curve, we are isolating the factors responsible for it. That is, we are assuming all the other factors that affect demand remain unchanged. Now let's return to our change in income. Let us assume that Rita is only consuming one good, which is bananas. Let the price of bananas be $P. With the initial income M, she can purchase M by P amount of bananas. If income is equal to $20 and price of bananas is equal to $5, then she can purchase 4 bananas with her income. Now let's assume that her income has risen to say M1. With M1 amount of income and the same level of prices, she can purchase M1 by P amount of bananas. If we assume that M1 is equal to $25 and P remains unchanged at $5, then she can purchase 5 bananas. Therefore, the increase in income will lead to a rightward shift of the demand curve. As we can see by the graph, at $P price of the bananas, the demand curve shifts from DD1 to DD2 as the income of the consumer increases from Q1 to Q2. Similarly, if income of a consumer falls, all things being constant, the demand curve shifts leftwards. Another factor that leads to a shift in demand is the price of related goods. For complementary goods, if the price of the complementary good rises, the demand for our good falls and our demand curve shifts leftwards. On the other hand, if the price of the complementary good falls, the demand for the good rises and our demand curve shifts rightwards. For substitutes, it's the opposite. If price of a substitute good rises, the demand for our good increases and therefore there is a rightward shift of the demand curve. On the other hand, if the price of the substitute good falls, the demand for our good falls and our demand curve shifts leftwards. If you have any doubts about the substitutes and complementary goods, I've covered it in a previous video, which I link in the description of this video. Lastly, we'll talk about how changes in tastes and preferences lead to a shift in demand curve. If preferences change in favor of a good, the demand curve for such a good shifts rightwards. The demand curve shifts leftwards when there's an unfavorable change in preference. For example, let's look at demand for soup by Johnny throughout the year. During summer, Johnny feels that it is too hot to consume soup and therefore his demand for soup falls. Thus, the demand curve for soup shifts leftwards. During winters, Johnny feels that the soup provides him with warmth and therefore his demand for soup rises. Thus, the demand curve for soup shifts rightwards. Can you think of any other factor that might lead to a shift in the demand curve? Leave your thoughts in the comments. It will be fun to discuss. Now that we've looked at the concepts of the movement along demand curve and the shift in demand, let's move on to elasticity of demand. But first, what is elasticity of demand and why do we need such a concept? Law of demand only tells us that there exists a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. If price of a good increases, we know that quantity demanded will fall. What law of demand doesn't tell us is the magnitude of the fall in quantity demand. This is where elasticity comes in. Elasticity of demand measures the responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in the price. It is measured as percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price. If Q0 is the original quantity demanded, P0 is the original price. If Q1 is the new quantity demanded and P1 is the original price, then price elasticity of demand or ED is equal to Q1 minus Q0 into 100 upon Q0 whole divided by P1 minus P0 into 100 upon P0, which would be equal to QC upon PC into P0 upon Q0, where we are assuming that QC is the change in quantity demanded and PC is the change in price. Price elasticity of demand will be a negative number since there is a negative relationship between quantity demanded. However, we generally take its absolute value. The higher the elasticity is, quantity demanded is more responsive to the change in price. So an elasticity of demand which is equal to 1 implies that a change in quantity demanded is equal to the change in price of the commodity. Thus, roughly we have absolute value of elasticity of demand to be first greater than 1. When it's greater than 1, we say demand is highly elastic. Then we can have elasticity of demand to be equal to 1. When it's equal to 1, we say that the demand is unitary elastic. And lastly, we have elasticity of demand to be less than 1. When it's less than 1, we say that the demand is inelastic. We have some more extreme cases that we'll understand with the help of graph in the next section. Let us understand elasticity of demand graphically. We know that the linear demand curve has the equation Q0 is equal to A minus B into P0. Using the concepts of equation of a line, we can find the slope of this equation, which would be equal to QC upon PC is equal to minus B. We can use this equation to transform our elasticity of demand equation. We know that elasticity of demand is equal to QC upon PC into P naught upon Q naught. Inserting the slope of the demand curve, we will have ED is equal to minus B into P naught upon Q naught. Furthermore, we can insert the equation of Q naught into the elasticity of demand equation to get the following: minus B into P naught upon A minus B into P naught. And this will be our equation 1. We'll come back to this equation in a while. Now let's draw the demand curve. As we have already seen, our linear demand curve equation is Q naught is equal to A minus B into P naught. Therefore, the horizontal intercept of a demand curve would be 1, where P naught is equal to 0, and thus Q naught would be equal to A. Vertical intercept would be 1, where Q naught is equal to 0, and therefore P naught is equal to A upon B. To find the midpoints of the demand curve, what we will do is that we will divide the vertical and the horizontal intercepts by 2. Thus, our midpoint for the y-axis would be A upon 2B, and our midpoint for the x-axis would be A upon 2. Can you think of the reason why we are dividing the intercepts by 2 to get the midpoints for the demand curve? If you know the reason, leave a comment. Now let's look at elasticity at different points of the demand curve. Our first scenario is when price is equal to A upon B, that is the vertical intercept of the demand curve. As we had already seen, our elasticity of demand equation ED was equal to B into P upon A minus B into P. Substituting the value of P in the equation, we will get B into A upon B whole divided by A minus B into A divided by B, which will give us A upon A minus A, which is equal to A upon 0 or infinity. Thus, at the vertical intercept of the demand curve, our demand is perfectly elastic. A slight change in price will lead to extreme changes in the quantity demanded for the good. Next, we look at when price is equal to A upon 2B, or elasticity of demand at the midpoint of the demand curve. Substituting the value of P by A upon 2B in the elasticity of demand equation, we will get B into A upon 2B whole divided by A minus B into A upon 2B, which is equal to A upon 2 upon A upon 2, which would be equal to 1. Thus, at the midpoint of the demand curve, our elasticity of demand is unitary elastic. Here, the change in quantity demand with respect to price would be equal to the magnitude of change in the price of the good. At the horizontal axis of our demand curve, we know that price is equal to 0. Therefore, at point A, our elasticity of demand when price is equal to 0 is equal to B into 0 upon A minus B into 0, which will give us 0. Thus, we can say that demand is perfectly inelastic. This means that irrespective of a price change, the quantity demanded for the good will not change. Furthermore, between elasticity of demand equal to 1 and elasticity of demand equal to 0, we have elasticity of demand less than 1, that is inelastic demand. This means that the magnitude change in quantity demanded is less than the magnitude change in the price of the good. On the other hand, between elasticity of demand equal to 1 and equal to infinity, we have elasticity of demand which is greater than 1 or elastic demand. Here, the magnitude of the change in quantity demanded is greater than the magnitude change in price of the commodity. Now that we have covered how elasticity works graphically, let's move on to the relationship between price elasticity of demand and expenditure on a good. Expenditure on a good is equal to Q into P, where Q is the quantity demanded and P is the price of the good. We know that when price of the good increases, its quantity demanded falls, and therefore our new expenditure will be Q minus Q1 into P plus P1, where Q1 and P1 are the changes in quantity demanded and price respectively. Thus, our change in expenditure would be Q minus Q1 into P plus P1 minus QP. Change in expenditure, which is equal to Q minus Q1 into P plus P1 minus QP, is equal to QP plus QP1 minus Q1P minus Q1P1 minus QP, which is equal to QP1 minus Q1P minus Q1P1. For smaller values of Q1 and P1, Q1 into P1 would be negligible. Therefore, our change in expenditure equation would look something like this: Q into P1 minus Q1 into P. Taking P1 common from the equation, it will be equal to P1 whole multiplied by Q minus PQ1 upon P1. Multiplying and dividing the equation by Q, we will have Q into P1 whole multiplied by Q upon Q minus Q1 upon P1 into P upon Q. Since we know that Q1 upon P1 into P upon Q is our elasticity of demand, thus we can say that change in expenditure equation is equal to Q into P1 into 1 minus ED, where ED is our elasticity of demand. We have established a relationship between elasticity of demand and change in expenditure. Let's see how expenditure reacts to different price elasticity of demand. If our elasticity of demand is greater than 1, then our change in expenditure would be negative. Thus, expenditure decreases as the price rises. If our elasticity of demand is less than 1, then our change in expenditure would remain positive. Thus, expenditure increases as price rises. If our elasticity of demand is equal to 1 or unitary elastic, then our change in expenditure would remain 0, and therefore our expenditure remains unchanged. So now we have covered movement along the demand curve and shift in demand curve. We've also seen elasticity of demand and how it impacts expenditure of a good. With this, I end the series of theory of demand. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment and I will try to answer. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Thank you for watching and I will see you in the next one.